Okay, let's get to it. I'm going to pass the controls to John Stinnett with Symantec so that he can start learning, so that we can start learning more about this. John?
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate it. First, I just want to again say thank you to Aurora for putting it together and allowing Symantec to come in and showcase some of these items. Aurora's been a great partner with us over the years. Really great guys. Symantec Knights on staff that know our technology really well as many other technologies. I'm just really good at piecing these things together from the security perspective. So I just want to start with that. So as Larry mentioned, my name is John, Channel SE for Symantec, covering the West region. And we're just going to talk today about a specific product that we call web isolation. But before I get into that, I want to start with the landscape, and I feel it's important to understand some of the problems that we're trying to solve with this technology that probably resonate with each of us every day. So, as we mentioned, web threats, email, phishing threats, these are things that have been around for a long time. These are things that are going to continue to persist for a long time. And these are vectors that continue to be trouble areas for all people when it comes to information security. These are just a couple eye-popping numbers from various reports that have been out there, such as Verizon, Gartner, Symantec issues a security report. And the one that sort of stands out to me is at the bottom on the left side. Every 4 seconds, an unknown malware is downloaded. And if you think about that is unbelievable. This is all based through users browsing the web on their corporate endpoints, right? Maybe they're not trying to do anything malicious, but these sort of things inevitably come in and can wreak havoc on an entire organization. Same thing with email. Email continues to be the number one communication mechanism among employees, among businesses. So phishing and malicious links and things through email are still a really real threat that we need to contend with. And a lot of times, training and education is great, but it can still not be enough, because as we've seen through various campaigns, people are still going to click on links, whether, again, they're not doing it on purpose, they just get busy, they don't pay attention, you click things on your phone or your computer. So we need other ways to mitigate these sort of things. When you talk about web browsing, if you've ever looked at the underlying code behind a web page, which we'll show a demo of this a little bit later in the presentation, but there's a lot of things going on in the background with that. And all this is running on your endpoint as you load a browser. So to get those simple elements that look nice and clean on your web page, there's all sorts of scripts and calls and images and fonts and add-ons and Flash and third-party plugins, right? All of these are areas that could potentially be compromised and potentially be threat vectors for someone to get something malicious onto your system. So it's really quite a large attack surface when you think about it. And then there's the threats of the unknown web. So traditionally, when we think about users and their web browsing habits and balancing sort of security versus productivity, there's known good websites, right, that we've identified. We know what to do with that. We can allow those through. Obviously, we know that there's bad sites out there that have been identified that we can easily block. But then there's this in between, right? These uncategorized, these unknown things that have just spun up. And what do we do about this, right? Because a lot of this could be good, some of it could be bad. The traditional thought is maybe sort of just block, but then that could hamper user productivity. So this continues to be a problem for organizations. It's a huge challenge. New sites are created every day. Again, many of them are legitimate, but there's some few that are snuck in there are great cover for hackers to exfiltrate data. So it's sort of hard to assess what's good and bad, and what do we do about that, again, with that balance of our security posture and also making our users happy. And the proxies, some people, when you think of proxies, they might say that this is an outdated technology, it's no longer needed. And I would argue that is absolutely not the case. It may be more important today than ever, right? There's sort of been this evolution of what a proxy does, and started as a way to, cache websites, sort of help with bandwidth and things like that. And eventually evolved into what we call Proxy 2.0, things that came from our Blue Coat acquisition, right? Where now we started to be able to do a little more control over that, some URL filtering, assign levels. This is where that traditional sort of allow and block posture came along, right? We could use things to categorize what's known good and known bad. And then we still ran into that middle layer problem. So this is what we're solving now with what we call our proxy 3.0, which is now built in with web isolation. So we start to solve some of those challenges that uncategorized. We eliminate some of that overblocking. When you do that, you also mitigate some of the headache on maybe your help desk teams, right? They have to filter all these tickets that they get from users. That's valuable time that they could be taking action on some other remediation incident, whether it's a DLP or something a little bit higher priority. So a little bit of cost savings there, some time savings. And these are all things that we're solving through this evolution. So let's start to talk a little bit about web isolation itself as a product and fundamentals. So isolation is exactly what it sounds like, meaning that everything that would be running, whether through that normal traditional sort of browser on the endpoint, is now running away from the endpoint in a secured environment. So we're basically assuming that everything is bad, all that code, that underlying things that we talked about that go into a web page, we're just going to assume that's all bad, but we're not going to ever let that reach your endpoint. We're going to run that somewhere else. And this starts to eliminate things like that idea of what we'll call a patient zero or a 0-day vulnerability, where maybe there was something that wasn't seen before that executed on a user's endpoint. So it didn't know that it needed to be blocked. So it got successfully downloaded. Now all of a sudden there's a new ransomware that got onto one of your desktops and it has filtered through your whole system. So the fundamental basics of this is that we are running this away from that endpoint in a secured environment where nothing can ever actually filter into the endpoint system itself. Here's another way to look at that architecture. So again, on the left, there's the risks of browsing documents, things that might come through. So with Symantec Web Isolation, again, each tab on a browser that you might look at, each one of those is going to get rendered in a secure container in the isolation environment. And essentially what happens is that gets sent back to your system in a 100% visually rendered safe stream that the user can still interact with. So they're interacting with things inside the environment and getting that visual stream back to their system. So from a user's perspective, they can still click around the web page. They can do right clicks, copy, paste, things like that. They can interact with media, audio, video files, and everything works just as it would running right there on the desktop. But the beauty is, if anything happens to be malicious running in that, it's now inside of that container. So there's no chance of that leaking off, from the browser now getting onto the endpoint. And then when a user decides that they're done browsing, they close out that tab or they close out that web browser, that container that we rendered all that in basically gets securely thrown away. So if there was malware or anything malicious running in that all gets deleted, that container is gone. We no longer have to worry about any of that. So we're washing our hands of this. And the beauty part also is there's no additional agent required on an endpoint to make this happen, compatible with many browsers. So it's something that's very simple to deploy and start applying policies to and get running. So one of the important things behind this is you need intelligence to leverage these threats, right? Again, we talked about you have to know what's good, you have to know what's bad. If it's unknown, how do we figure things out? And Symantec has something that we're really proud of. It's called our Global Intelligence Network, or our GIN. And this is basically the largest civilian intelligence network in the world. Again, some of the stats here of the amount of emails and requests and endpoints that we see and scan on a daily basis. But the one thing that stands out here to me is the amount of researchers and engineers. We have our various threat assessment teams, over 3,000 people dedicated strictly to researching threats, engineering threats, reverse engineering these threats, understanding them, understanding how they operate, being able to create intelligence, in the products and in our intelligence network to take action on those, to block things with machine learning, et cetera. 3,000 people, quite frankly, that's larger than some maybe niche security vendors or fairly large security vendors total that you might see out there. So to me, that's really impressive. And this is the workhorse that really powers what we do and what we're about on a day in and day out basis. So let's, now that you kind of understand a little bit about the landscape, some of what the product is trying to accomplish, I want to talk a bit about the use cases. So what are some of the things that you might need to be thinking about in your environment, or you're already thinking about, or some of the questions to ask, or maybe even some of the questions to raise to your management or your C-level boards, and things that you should really start thinking about. And there's really three major ones that I want to touch on today. And the first one is going more into that idea of overblocking. So the question could be, again, how do I balance security versus productivity, right? We all know that our users need access to the web. It's a fundamental part of what a lot of businesses do. We need direct access. We need quick access to things, whether we're working with third parties that we need to access their sites that we may not be familiar with, or some new page that we need to interface. And if the end user cannot get to a legitimate site, that becomes a problem, right, for everybody. The user gets frustrated, they can't do their job. The company is now losing money because they have an employee that's out there that you're paying, that they can't do what they need to do, right? Because now everyone blames security. Well, security is an issue, and we get a bad rep. Again, this leads to support tickets, maybe things of that nature. So it's a difficult balance. A typical security policy that you might look at standard today maybe looks something like this, right? We have our allowed categories that we know are good, and then everything else for the most part would be sort of a standard deny, especially when it comes to anything about uncategorized sites or slightly suspicious sites, things with file sharing. Again, we know there's maybe some of those that we need to allow, but then there's a lot of overhead with this too. Right now, there becomes a lot of whitelisting. Again, we need an operations team to go in and open up these specific sites, and we have to start to maintain that list. Things like that can become really, really cumbersome. So we need ways to alleviate some of this pressure. So one thing you could certainly do is you could isolate everything, right? You have your known good, your known bad, and let's just isolate everything in the middle. It sounds great in theory. There could be a lot of issues with that, right? There's going to be infrastructure and costs associated with using that technology. So if that's a way that you want to go, that is certainly something that you can do with this technology. But what really gets great about specifically Symantec's web isolation in conjunction with, again, some of our intelligence network and our intelligence information is we have the idea of something called advanced risk levels. And essentially what this does is this will take websites, and instead of just saying, well, this is good or this is bad, yes or no, we can start to assign even more granular levels to that from 0 to 10. So starting 0, maybe this is whitelisted, 1, 2, 3, 4, they're green. Good reputation, consistently has behaved well, haven't had any issues with malware or being taken over or anything like that. And then, all the way up the board starts to get yellow, orange, red. So now we can start to make our policy and shape this a little more to what makes sense to our environment and what we're comfortable with. So we don't have to allow everything. We can now start to categorize, allow, block, and isolate using these even more granular levels of 1 through 10. So now we can only isolate some things, and this is great because, again, this could have an impact on maybe it's the cost factor or something, or maybe if we're going on-prem, what infrastructure do we want to spin up? So the ability to get as granular as you want to start solving these problems and balancing that productivity versus security is huge, and is a really great differentiator for Symantec in this space. second thing that I want to touch on is the idea of privileged user. So in every organization, there's a group of people, or there's someone who is at a high level that sort of wants to be exempt from security, right? They don't want to have any rules on them. They want to be able to do whatever they want. And that's understandable, but this also poses a huge risk, right? Because from an attacker's perspective, these are exactly the people that you want to go after. Essentially people with, keys to the kingdom, executives, IT admins, people who might have high level privileges, someone who, if you get control of their system, now you can move through the whole network and you can do all sorts of damage, right? So this is an issue. And I'll give you a little story here behind privileged users. So this technology that we've branded as web isolation, we actually acquired this. It was a company that was called Fireglass. And as we were going through this process, our president, he was talking it over with the board, kind of sharing the technology, and there was a little bit of pushback. And the story goes, they're saying, well, we don't know if we trust this. We just don't know if it'll work. We can see some potential issues with this. And so he kind of sits back and he says, well, okay, have you guys had any issues with browsing on your computers over the last couple months, right? And they kind of look at each other. No, everything's been fine. And he says, well, that's funny because I've been, demoing this technology on your systems for the last month or 2 months. And so that was sort of the light bulb for them to say, well, okay, I guess this really does work, and it is good because we haven't seen any issues. So that sort of use case with privileged users or high level people is exactly what I'm talking about. And I thought that was just a clever thing that he did there when getting them to look at this. So again, we looked at that policy on the screens earlier where we decided to isolate everything. Maybe that doesn't make sense in the context of if you have thousands of users to do it for them, but a handful of people on their executive staff or IT admins, it absolutely would make perfect sense in that scenario. Go ahead and just isolate all that traffic and take the worry about what it is they're doing from an endpoint perspective or a browsing perspective or whatever they might be clicking on various emails that they might get. So really adds a benefit to sort of help you sleep better at night from a security staff perspective of worrying about some of your more privileged users. And the third kind of big use case here is the idea of email and phishing attacks, which is as we touched on at the beginning, still a really big problem. A lot of URLs and links come through email, right? And a large percentage of them are important. Maybe it's a link to a document that you need to download, or some sort of website that you need to log in with credentials to access a file or get into a third-party network or things like that. So this is a very real threat and something that is highly used on a daily basis. So how does web isolation play into this? And essentially the same thing that we're doing here, where we're taking the sessions and we're running them off the endpoint, but we can tie this into email. So if you get a malicious link, we can identify that through email and policy, and we can know now that when a user tries to click on that, we're going to send that to the isolation session. So just think about the power behind that, right? Because we can still have the users go ahead and click, which we know that a large percentage of them are probably going to do anyway. But now that we have our risk scores and we're backed by the intelligence network and we're scanning these when they come in and also on the click time, we now know that it's bad and we're just going to go ahead and isolate it. So yeah, it's running, they clicked on it, but nothing's going to infect their system. And we don't really have to worry about it. It's sort of a protection without a detection theory, if you will. Right? We didn't have to detect anything. We didn't really have to throw up an alert, but we were still protected from receiving anything through the user clicking on that link. And this also goes for credential phishing, right? So some of these URLs that you might get through an email, they come to a crafted page that looks exactly like something you would use on a day in and day out basis. In this example, it's Office 365. Sometimes maybe it's PayPal, or maybe it's a shopping site, maybe it's eBay, something like that. And what the hackers really want to do is they want to make a page that looks like that, so they can get you to type in your username and password, right? And then they can store that. And chances are, with the way a lot of people use passwords, that can get them, if it's corporate credential, obviously they can start to use that to move laterally to the network. They can start to sell these on black market, anything, whatever they might want to do with it. So we have ability to detect these sort of things as well through isolation, and apply a couple different cool policies from the end user perspective, which I will show you in the demo on how we handle that threat. So again, how does this really work? Traditional sort of non-isolation, you'd see a phishing site come into your inbox, the user clicks on it, and you're owned, right? But with the way we can do it, we can take a look at the URLs as they come in. We can apply a policy, we can apply a rating to them, and then we can also go ahead and, so we'll rewrite that link. And then we'll also look at the link again, what we call click time. So when you click on it again through the inbox, we'll go ahead and we'll scan it again, do another check, just to make sure. And again, we can filter that through isolation portal if needed, or maybe we just go ahead and block it depending on what the policy says. But now we have another layer to stop sort of that phishing threat. This is just what a typical sort of deployment with this might look like. Again, I kind of stepped you through it previously there. We have a couple different flavors of this from our perspective, where we have our on-site mail gateway that this is compatible with. We also have what we call our email security.cloud, which is a cloud-based version of the email, which isolation works in. So those are both integrated today, both fully supported. They provide one centralized management interface for it, all the logging, reporting that you might need, and we can support all those types of users. Again, just sort of showing that flow of what traditionally happens, and how some of our integrations help to solve checking both when the email first comes in, doing again scans on the click, and then being able to apply policies and using our global intelligence network to that. It's also important to note here that while, of course, we have great integrations with Symantec products, we play really nicely with other third-party mail gateway integrations. So you could have an existing mail gateway do some of the link rewriting for you, still take action on some of these isolation policies, and still be able to reap the benefits of this technology. So that's becoming a major theme for Symantec, is that we understand that while we are the largest cybersecurity vendor and we have a large platform that is interconnected, we understand that sometimes it doesn't always make sense. There may be one or two other vendors that you need to work with, or that you just, you have to use them at this time for whatever. And we are really opening up our platform to integrate and tie nicely with a lot of other folks as well. And I have another slide on this a little later, but I just wanted to kind of point that home there, that we don't ever want to cut anybody off from innovation with any of these technologies. So I want to move into a quick demo of this. So we talked a little bit about the use cases. I want to show you sort of how this works. There's no isolation. Wall Street Journal. I can click in on the articles, right? Everything's working fine. What is really interesting is if we take a look at the source on the web page, you will see all the things that are making this web page go. All right, so you can see the headers, you can see all the variables, all the scripts, all the functions, all the calls, all the embedded fonts, right? And you could see I can scroll on this for a very long time. I mean, this is me just scrolling all the way down this page with all of these elements that are on here. So again, this goes back to that broad attack surface from the web. All of these things that have to happen here could potentially, they just make that footprint larger. So let's go ahead and we'll take a look at the same page. And this is now going through Fireglass, right? I have the same Wall Street Journal. I can click on the articles. I can view the articles. Let's take it back. I can have a right click, right? I can new tab, copy image, some of the same behaviors that a user would see or do. And if we look at the source on this guy, you can see now. So all we're doing is we're running this in that isolation environment. There's a script going there, and we're sending that stream back, okay? So all that stuff from the first example was running locally on the endpoint that can be taken advantage of and get to your laptop. Now it's impossible. It's all running in that container. If there was anything bad on there, it can never actually reach my desktop that I am on right now. And when I close this tab out, that entire session in that portal is gone, thrown away. If there was anything malicious on it, essentially, it doesn't matter. I don't care. It's gone, right? So I'm completely safe from that. I'm not going to show a video on this demo simply for the fact that streaming video in general does not look good through like a web-like service or something like that. But I can show you that when you're actually on the desktop, I can go to YouTube and I can play a video just fine, just for the sake of just being that we're broadcasting over a Zoom. There'll inherently be some latency with that, so I'm not even going to show that. But some of the other things here, think about Flash, right? Think about web plugins again. So if we go to websites that require Flash, you've probably all seen this, right? You need to download Flash Player. Again, another potentially vulnerable aspect that we are willingly installing on our system. And, there's always been articles through the news, and we've seen them that, Flash has all sorts of security issues, vulnerabilities, constantly needing to be patched. So it's a real problem. But if we think about that in terms of isolation, we can just have that going, right? So we don't have to worry about it. Flash is on. I see the 24 o'clock. Great show, by the way. I miss it. I miss Jack Bauer. Anyways, again, just taking away that threat from your endpoint and still allowing the user to be productive. They can see what it was that they needed to see, and they don't have to worry about it. And then we talked about the idea of credential theft and phishing, right? What about these maliciously crafted web pages? So I can go to a page that's set up to look exactly like my Office 365 login. So through some of our intelligence network, we can determine that this is not actually Office 365. This is a malicious version of this, and we can do a couple things. We can let you interact with the page, so I can put my email in there, but as soon as I start to do anything with a password, we can throw a warning. You can see now from the user perspective, hold on a second, this seems to be a phishing website. We've just gone ahead and blocked you from typing into your password field. So now as a user, I understand that there's some sort of threat here that I need to be aware of. And, you could do various things. You could have an alert thrown, and this is sort of also like a built-in training in a way, right? Getting some user awareness. So that's one way to do it. Another way is that we can just completely go ahead and say, you know what, we're not even going to allow anything to happen here. We're just going to do read only on this page. So you can see when I went in the bottom left here, we got this box that came up that says it's in the protected view. So for security purposes, this is in read only mode. All input fields have been disabled. I believe some of this is customizable. You can do various things in your environment. But again, we're letting the users know that something strange is going on here, and this may not be exactly what they think it is. So they're not getting their username and password harvested for them to be able to use in a later attack on your network. And then the last thing that we didn't really talk about in the use cases, but I think it's important, is that you can still view and interact with documents. You can still download documents if you need to. So let's say you needed to look at an Excel file that somebody sent you based on various policies or however things may be. We can go ahead and actually render that document in the isolated chamber. Again, we can still interact with this, right? You can see I can click on the buttons. I can change some of the details in here to see the graphs change and update. But again, this isn't actually on my endpoint. Now, if I go ahead and decide that I've looked at it, I preview it, I think it's good, I do want to download this, we can then run another check on that through something that we call malware and content analysis. So just because we viewed it and we think it's good, we're still going to go ahead and do another security check on that. So when I click download, it'll be sent to those services. It'll get scanned through a couple different anti-malware engines. Again, leveraging some of that information from the intelligence network to just do a double check and say, yeah, we didn't find anything in here, and go ahead and download that to the desktop. Just another layer of protection, just in case if anything what did happen to be found in there, but we couldn't exactly see it through the preview. Our content analysis system will go ahead and block that from being downloaded to you. All right. So hopefully you guys thought that was cool. I think this is, Larry mentioned it off the top. This is sort of one of those technologies that you look at and you go, wow, that's actually really neat. Not just neat, but extremely beneficial in the context of things that most companies are dealing with on a day in and day out basis. So some of the differentiation for Symantec. I mean, there's a couple isolation vendors out there, right? Some people are claiming to do it. But what makes us better, or what makes us stand out? And there's definitely a lot of good things there. It's a superior product in terms of just the seamlessness of it, right? I showed you that user experience. You didn't get to see videos in this demo, but it's something we can certainly show if we go ahead and spin up an individual POC, right? But just from the user's perspective, how seamless all of that is, some of the advanced functionality. We have some use case information that I think we can probably share of some of our larger deployments and what some of those folks have said about us and how they're really enjoying using this and how it's helping their security posture. Again, we're the largest security company in the world. And along with that comes a lot of great enterprise grade solutions, right? We have highest uptimes, SLAs, multi-tenancy, many different data centers around the world. We do some peering with vendors such as Microsoft and things of that help even with your Office 365 deployments. Great support is 24/7. We also have great partners for support such as Aurora. And again, you get all this in a single vendor. But then what really starts to make it shine is the idea of what we call our integrated cyber defense platform, right? So isolation is just a piece of protection that inherently gets baked into everything that we do. And we are really one of the only vendors, if not the only vendor, that when you start to showcase all that together, the things that you can do with DLP and information protection and encryption and isolation and how you put that across a broader portfolio, that's really where we start to stand out. So when we're talking specifically just even about isolation, you can see where we have this built in today, right? We talked about the on-prem gateways. We talked about the email gateways, part of our proxy stack, whether that's our traditional sort of physical appliance or what we call our web security service, which is our proxy in the cloud. And then we're going to be doing some great things around integrating this into our endpoint agents for any SEP customers out there, any of our CASB or DLP customers. So I think Symantec in the past has talked about integrations and things like that, and maybe they didn't really come to fruition. But really in the last year or two, I've been on board a little over a year, and I can honestly say that. And by the way, prior to that, I was on the customer side for 10 years using a lot of these Symantec products, and I really think it was a great time because I have seen and Symantec has shown that these integrations are real and they exist, and the power behind them and how they function. But again, we're also opened up to third parties. You can use this technology with other next-gen firewalls, other proxies, other email services. It could be, a standalone offering to tie in with there. When we're talking about differentiators, just want to point out some of that. So here's the way some of that looks with some of those other vendors, right? Again, we talked about other web gateways. SIMS is a big one, right? You want to have information on your action. You want to be able to offload data, things of that nature. Again, we work with some of those larger firewalls. So we want to play nice with everybody. One of the huge differentiators, though, when you talk about working on the Symantec platform and web isolation specifically, is the idea of still being able to apply DLP to an isolated environment. Because if you think about it, just because you're isolated, right, and you're stopping those threats, some of those malware threats and phishing things from getting to your endpoint, it doesn't necessarily stop someone from being able to funnel data out through the internet in an isolated environment. So one of the awesome things that we can do, I'll go ahead and build that out, is we can, in conjunction with our proxy data, we can maintain those user IDs through the whole session, and we can then start to apply policies that we have, both through our proxies and our DLP onto that session. So now we can go ahead and take data loss prevention action on that session too. So now we're adding a whole nother layer of protection onto what we've initially been talking about of the use cases of the web-borne protection and the phishing protection. And that's just something that the other platforms can't do. You're going to just get that traffic forwarded to isolation. You will get maybe some of those benefits, but you will be missing out on a whole host of that you can't apply. Again, example for DLP policies too. So that is a huge one for us. And then a little bit about our web security service, or our WSS. Again, essentially think of this as a proxy in the cloud, and web isolation is inherently baked right into this. So with web security service, it's a nice, easy, cloud-hosted, web-based solution. If you're an administrator of this, you can jump right in. It's very easy to create policies. It's very simply laid out, right? From where to where, for whom, what action do I want to take, allow, block, isolate, and that is all cooked in there today and extremely easy to use. And one of the great things about this is that also, if you happen to be a Symantec endpoint SEP customer, you can use that same agent to direct your users to this WSS service, right? So now you don't need another agent to do that. So now using SEP, you can put them into proxy in the cloud. You can take advantage of those proxy policies, those data loss prevention policies, those web isolation policies. Again, all cook in with the global intelligence network, all the machine learning and research that goes on behind that, and malware analysis. So this is, again, with our platform, this is where the power really starts to shine with Symantec. And one other thing that I want to talk about quickly here is some of the other things that we'll be able to do with the SEP agent. Eventually, we will be able to just use SEP itself. Maybe you're not redirecting WSS, but we can start to take a look at when you click on links, we can have SEP do some various redirections and use the intelligence network to go to web isolation. And then we can start to apply those various policies across that, right? And again, we talked about maybe you're looking at a document, and there's a couple different trees that we can go through there. We can block it or allow it. We can open it in isolation. And what we can do then is we can start to use SEP to, once that file gets down to the system, use the traditional sort of step and engine to do a lot of the reputation and signature checks and machine learning and some of the traditional things that step would do on there. This is I believe still a planned integration. I think this is targeting coming out maybe later this year or maybe sometime earlier next year. But again, just to sort of hammer home the idea of we're not stopping with the integrations. We're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep making this work, and we're gonna keep making this as efficient as we can for customers. So what's sort of the wrap up there? Again, benefits of web isolation. We're taking that very large attack surface of a web browser, which most people don't even think about, right? They take for granted that they're just getting their web content. And we are eliminating that from running. So ransomware threats, zero-day threats, zero-day exploits, balancing the idea of risk versus security, all of those things are getting solved by this technology. And again, no need for detection, no need for alerts, no need to waste cycles of an operations or a remediation team. We are defeating phishing, right? The idea of malicious links. We're blocking users from putting those credentials out there, whether it's through the read-only mode or some of the alerts that we can throw up on those and the multiple times that we scan and leverage those networks. And security overhead. We're simplifying that policy. We don't have to have people spending time whitelisting, blacklisting, looking at tickets, trying to make unhappy users have a better day by going through spending cycles with that. There's a turnaround time. Some examples for me when I had some of these issues in my previous jobs, right? Some of these turnarounds can take a day. That's just a lot of time lost. So again, sort of minimizing those incidents, minimizing some of that security operations overhead. Hopefully you've seen some of the power behind this. Again, Larry touched on it at the beginning. This, I'm telling you this from Symantec, but we're not the only ones saying this, right? Gartner is talking about that. People really need to start piloting this. This is going to be a significant value and security add for enterprises as we go over the next 2, 3, 4 years and into the future. So I would really encourage you guys to work with Aurora. Give these guys a call. They can help you get some of those demo portal accounts that I showed earlier. You can do different setups, whether it's on-prem with isolation, or you tie it into your proxies, or however you want to do it, and just start getting a POC going on this and see what makes sense, and really show the power of that and show that in your environment. So that is my spiel for you today on isolation. Again, I think you can see that just this one little piece and all of those problems and headaches that it can potentially solve. And then you start layering the other parts of the platform and integrations that maybe you already have in play today, whether it's with us or whoever it may be. Just hopefully I've shown some of that value there. And again, I appreciate you guys' time. And thank you again to Aurora. And I'll kick it back to Larry. We'll open it up for Q&A and wrap.
Hey, thanks, John. Great presentation. I think this presentation really highlights what Symantec has been working on for the last couple of years relative to integrating all these products and making life simpler for IT security folks. So appreciate that. I want to encourage anyone to enter questions if you have questions. And I do have a couple of things. First of all, John, I just wanted to make sure that we highlight this, that as far as platforms are concerned, is this cloud only, or do we have options?
There are different deployment options. Yep. So you can do, it can sort of stand alone as its own proxy if you want to do it that way and tie that in with, again, whatever next gen firewall or proxy you might have. It also ties in nicely with the cloud-based version that we can host. And then also, again, we have some of the built-in integrations with our web security service, for example. So there's a few different flavors of this.
Nice. So here's a good question. How do you keep the isolation platform protected? Can malware escape from the containers?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a lot of layers that go within that. There's like 36 some security layers. I kind of showed a graphic earlier that talks about those individual containers that run on a session. So each one of those is actually based on a Linux and Chromium hardened container. And again, those all get disposed when they're clicked off. Every single one of those runs with in essentially least privilege mode. So, should something escape one of those layers, it's not going to be able to go anywhere in that built-in environment. It's not going to have any access to other resources. And then there's an additional network security hardening layer behind that, sort of stopping anything from traversing across that visual stream. And then, of course, if there's any sort of hardware-related issue, like think like Spectre or Meltdown or something like that, of course, we would issue a patch for that immediately. So there's a lot of different layers securing that.
Got it. Thanks. Does web isolation break the user browsing experience when you're using SSL certificates?
Absolutely not. No. And in fact, it's fully supported. It essentially sort of serves as what you might call a man in the middle, right? So we would have a certificate that would be in use. And again, if you're already doing something like this with like web security service or a proxy, we just use that same certificate that is used in those services. So if you've done the legwork of deploying that through your environment and then maybe pushing that down to your systems, that's fully supported for sure.
Okay, thank you. All right, one other question here. Are there scaling issues when you deploy this solution on-premise?
There's some built-in scaling functionality in the product itself and some things that we can do to help leverage that as it grows. For example, we can render only tabs that are actually visible on the screen. Sometimes you look at someone's browser and they might have 20 tabs open, right? We can sort of set up some policies that say only the one that's being viewed, so we can save on some functionality there. We can do some fine tuning among the rendering from those Chromium containers that I talked about. We can do some optimization around what happens with images and some compression. So there are some things we can inherently do built in that help with the scaling. But that's also a great, sort of segue into, that's a great thing to work with you guys on when you start talking about deploying this. Just make sure you sit down with the partner, professional services, and just do the right amount of planning.
Okay, sounds good. Let's see. I do not see any other questions at the moment. So first of all, John, thank you. Thank you to all of the attendees who took the time today. If you would like to know more about this product, call us. What we're going to do is make it easy by sending out an email to everyone who registered. That'll have a recording of the presentation today. And if you'd like to know more, if you'd like to see web isolation working in your environment, contact us. And we look forward to working with you on this. John, thank you. And thanks to everyone. We look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.